Now I'm here.
We totally understand. How's your day going?
So far, so good. I'm 2 hours in the future, so trying to get to 5 o'clock.
In the space-time continuum. Welcome, Grace. It's great to have you back.
Thanks for having me.
All right, you ready to get started?
I do. So I'm going to answer some of the questions. I'm going to introduce myself first, and then I'm going to answer some of the questions that was sent along. And, my whole policy is this is a conversation, so feel free to interrupt, raise your hand. I think there is maybe a raise your hand function on Zoom, so feel free to utilize any method in order to get my attention. You can also use any of the emoticons that kind of show up for people. I just did the face because I really like her. And so feel free to use anything like that to jump in. So I'm going to see if I can pull up these questions. And if you all hear a baby in the background, that is my nephew. He's almost 2 and he likes to talk a lot. We don't always know what he's saying, but he's very enthusiastic. So we like to be supportive. Awesome. So I'll start with my story. That really seems to be a really easy place to start. I'm Grace Andrews. I am what am I? I am now a principal product evangelist. That sounds, I think, one more abstract than it maybe is, or more strange than it may come across as. So we'll talk about that in a second. But I started in technology or in STEM, I think, when I was little. I have always loved taking things apart and then trying to put them back together. What that's meant for me was a lot of grounding, a lot of going to bed early, a lot of overall punishment for being insubordinate. But in the long run, it's really kind of paid off. So I have always been, I think, a tinkerer. A lot of people, when they hear tinker, they always think mechanical things. They think, oh, you're taking apart a microwave, you're putting back together a toy car, you're building something. I've always loved to tinker with what I think of as social perceptions, or in the way that we construct our thoughts around everything from technology to identity to society. So when I grew up, which I think I'm technically still growing, but it's all about who you ask. To my nephews, I'm like the oldest person on planet Earth. To my parents, I'm the youngest. So it's all relative. But I really started to be interested in systems. And usually when we talk about systems or systems thinking, a lot of times we're talking about engineering. But I like to think of everything as being a part of a system, whether it's everyone here today being a part of a system, whether it's me in my office being a system, or whether it's how we move throughout the world as a greater system. And once I really got into this idea of systems, I really wanted to break it down more. So I initially was going to be an archaeologist for 2 reasons. One, I wanted to discover a new dinosaur and call her Graciosaurus because vain. And then I wanted to identify a new group of people that had never been found before and call them Gracians because obviously, clearly, still vain. And my brother said that that sounded too much like Greeks or Grecians, and so that I should abandon ship and try something else. So I ended up doing anthropology. So I studied anthropology and sociology and politics when I was in the university landscape, which has been a long time, thankfully for me. And when I was there, I started to once again start to look at systems. I went to a predominantly white school, a school that's also very old and is named after Robert E. Lee. And there was so much, heritage. I'm from the Deep South. I'm originally from Ghana, West Africa. We came to the States when I was a little girl. I was raised in a town with 15,000 people outside of Memphis on the Mississippi River. So I'm Deep South through and through, but I had not been very familiar with like old money, like plantation South, because that's not the part of the South that I was from. And so going to Washington and Lee, I started to think of ways to tinker with my environment. And so I always say, like, one of the first places that I think that I conducted an informal, like, social study was definitely in undergrad. And being a part of a population that was representative of less than 2% of the student body, being not from, a lot of monetary means, with the average student coming from a family that was making $150,000 to $200,000 a year plus. I even was in school at the same time as P. Diddy's accountant's son, which was very interesting because the dad had a private helicopter. I was like, this is exciting. And so I started to look closely at the systems around me. And I learned a lot about myself in that time. I learned a lot about other people. And I realized that, like all systems, what is not always what it appears to be. And that for me really started this journey of understanding and identifying what the intersection is between systems and what are some of the bridges we can build to people. And I know a lot of people are like, well, what's that got to do with technology or STEM or anything like that? And for me, what that meant was figuring out ways to feel more like the people I was with than different without having to lose myself. That's important because I actually found out that that's the principal way in which I show up at work. So how did I get to where I am today? So I started off doing computer help desk at the university level, which was great. I did it because it paid $10 an hour in the early 2000s, which was so much money. And work study only paid 5. So I was like, double work study? I think so. And so I was started making my $10 an hour. Is very excited about that. And as I spent more time in the university computing help desk, I learned something that's like totally changed the way I approach my work. And what I learned was that the technology or the solution does not truly matter. It's the way in which you get to that solution and who you bring along. So what do I mean by that? When I worked at the university help desk, what I became really good at was delivering really bad news. So I was the person who, if you fell asleep while studying for finals senior year and you spilled coffee on your computer and you lost every file that you've ever had, I was the person who broke that news to you. Or if you were submitting a test and all of a sudden the computer in the computer lab crashed and it did not autosave, I was the person that delivered that news to you. Or if there was a really difficult professor whose projector was not working in the middle of class and they were irate, I was the one they sent to the classroom to fix the projector for the professor. And what I quickly learned was the reason that I was always selected as tribute, just like my good friend Katniss, was because I had a way of understanding the system that was really different from my colleagues at the University Computing Help Desk. I always centered the person inside of the problem as opposed to the solution to the problem. And what that allowed for me to do is what I call have heart-to-heart conversations. And so I would tell that person, this sucks. You literally lost all the things you've been working on for 4 years. But let me tell you what we can do. And considering the possibility for the potential of a solution where we all could be really happy. And that sounds so simple. And that sounds even a little silly. And, for a lot of folks, especially people in the world of STEM and in the world of entrepreneurship, it's a big thing that's often overlooked. A lot of times when you ask people, why are you building what you're building? Or why do you work on what you work on? The reasons have very little to do with what the solution is. Facebook wasn't invented to connect grandparents to grandkids. Like that was not the reason, right? Elon Musk wasn't creating Tesla because he really, really thought that the everyday average person could afford to purchase his vehicles and make a difference in the world, right? A lot of times in the industries around technology and engineering, it's people chasing possibility, but they're very rarely chasing the connection to the people who make that possibility even a reality. And so when I got into tech, I didn't want to write code. I found I didn't love that as much as one would expect. And I also didn't want to not know how the technical pieces work. I wanted to sit somewhere in the intersection of it all. So if it was a Venn diagram between the technology and the people and the product, I'd be in the middle. So I started off doing what's called solutions engineering or sales engineering or solutions consulting, where you help people use your technology. I say you lightly here because it's the technology of the company that had hired me, was giving me a paycheck and health insurance. So it wasn't my personal technology, but it was technology that I could believe in, feel strongly about, and want to actually share with others. And what was really interesting about that job is a lot of what we were doing was what I did at the University Computing Help Desk. Luckily, it wasn't the terrible news like, hey, listen, everything's crashed, sorry. It was more sort of, tell me what your problems are in the technical work you do. And what made me really good at my job is that I was not afraid to say I did not know. The industries that I have worked in are really big on ego. They're really big on bravado. They're really big on, I call it brain bullying, making other people in the room feel so small that they never want to speak up. And what I have found, mostly by spending a lot of time with people who are in totally different fields than me, or people who some people might say are uneducated or young or whatever, is that everyone holds so much wisdom inside of themselves if someone will make it a safe space to share the wisdom. And so in the work that I do, I've been able to come up with some really creative solutions, not because I came up with it, but because I was willing to listen to maybe a non-traditional perspective to the problem. I was centering the people inside of the problem instead of looking for the solution to the problem outside of the people. And so a lot of what my work consisted of was listening. And that sounds, so so simple, but a lot of people listen in order to respond. They don't listen in order to hear. And in the job that I did, one, burnout was really high because it's taxing. Supporting customers, especially enterprise customers who have deadlines, who have teams, who have lives outside of work that can be stressful, managing their expectations on what you can do technically, what your product is capable of doing can be very difficult. But what I found is if you make them your friends first and you become very comfortable in saying, I don't know, but I'd like to talk about it and build a solution with you and not just for you, is that it becomes a very effective way in which to enable others. And that's another part of the job I did, enablement, teaching people how to use what we use. And what was really cool about, at least really cool in the beginning of my career that I didn't expect, is when I first got started, I would make time with people who I would say were more senior than me, especially because I was junior in the role. So when I got started, like 10 plus years ago. And as I went further into my career, the one thing that I've really tried to hold on to is my ability to say, I do not know the answer, but I would like to find out. Can you help me? And in my very first job, official job in technology, working for someone else because I was building something with a friend for 4 years, I started this guide. And the point of the guide was a technical guide that was supposed to teach technical assets. So myself, other kinds of engineers who actually like hook up the technology for our customers and install it. And usually there'll be implementation engineers. They're called professional service engineers. There's all kinds of names for them, but they would go on site and they would do the hands-on full work that I might have, diagrammed for, did a proof of concept for, and did a bite size of. And what I realized is a lot of my colleagues didn't know a lot of what my other colleagues knew, but they never admitted it. So when I started putting together the how-to guide, it was, as they say, like dumb simple or dumb easy. It was stuff like go into the terminal, type these commands, wait for it to say this, type this command, click here, the idea was it was so simple that a non-technical person could be seated at a computer, be shown what they needed to use, and be able to actually implement the solution. And once I did that, a lot of my colleagues came to me and they're like, until someone had said, I don't know how to do that. How do I do this? I myself did not know, but I simply just didn't ask. And it's become a reoccurring theme in my work with people coming to me saying, I didn't know that either. And I just was scared to ask because I didn't want to look like I wasn't doing my job, or I didn't know what I was doing, or that I was dumb, right? All the things that I think we as people are scared of, which is completely normal. And I think that for me, that's become, as they say, like, what's your superpower? My superpower is knowing what I don't know, understanding the limitations of my skill set, understanding the limitations of my experience, but not being afraid to, one, articulate that, and two, push through that. And so that takes me to what I do now. So what I do now is I'm no longer a traditional technical asset. So I'm not an engineer in that way anymore, I guess. But what I do now is I help people better understand the gospel of the product that my company builds. So that's why the role I'm in is called an evangelist. It is our job to help people understand what it is we're doing, how we do it, and why we do it. So that can look like anything. For a developer evangelist, that might mean making how-to videos where you're troubleshooting code or you're installing systems or whatever it takes for a product to work. I work in the marketing department. So for me, that actually means I get to come up with new ways of helping customers, both internal and external, understand what it is we even do as a company and the possibilities of the solution. So that this time around has meant that I got to develop a digital magazine from scratch. That's been really cool. I got to start a podcast, mostly internal, but some of it is public facing for the world. And then I also got to be the voice of a podcast that the company put on. So it's not yet released to the public yet, but in it they interview people from like Netflix and from Google and from DARPA. And I sadly don't get to talk to any of them for real, but I'm just kind of your narration or your voice that leads you through the journey of information about the topics around who and what and why the internet was created. So that's, what I do now. And I've taken a lot of twists and turns to get here. One of them being grad school, and which is totally unrelated. My, area of study and specialization is business in the emerging market economies with a focus on Indigenous cultural preservation and economic access. So that's left field. It's totally just not what I do. But what I found is in the work I do, what's been the greatest skill for anything, right? I know some of the questions are like, what's helped you overcome adversity? What are your assets or your strength? I always say I have three core strengths. One, I've got a good attitude. I usually have a really stank attitude, actually, and I'm very insubordinate, but I have found that because I have a good attitude with others and my bad attitude is reserved for stuff like driving, that I do all right. And then secondly, I have found that humor is such a big part of life. Maybe some of you are listening and you're like, well, I'm not that funny, as in me. Or maybe you're thinking you yourself are not that funny, and that's okay. I always say sometimes humor is about energetic positioning. So what I mean by that is the ability to receive the lesson, but not hold on to the pain of how you received it. So being able to be in good humor and not just have a sense of humor about the things that occur. Things will always go badly. Things will always disappoint you. Sometimes you'll disappoint yourself or someone else. And it's about having the good humor to bring light into those situations by accepting whatever it is that has gone left, but not being afraid of saying, I'm sorry, or if you're deserved the apology, demanding your apology and then saying, I accept it, and being able to truly and genuinely embrace your mistakes. I think that good humor and a positive attitude really go a long way in that. And then thirdly is I'm not afraid of the things that maybe other people are scared of, in the sense of I get scared just like anybody else, except for that one lady that I read the article about who doesn't have the place in her brain where fear lives. And so she's actually never afraid. It's a very interesting article. I don't remember where I read it, but Google it. It was a fascinating read. I'm not her. I definitely get scared. But what I've realized is learning to, inside of me, recognize what is fear and what is just a feeling of inadequacy and what is a feeling of being afraid to actually try as opposed to even fail, and knowing the difference, and also knowing when sometimes that feeling of fear is the thing you have to feel right before you do the thing you've always dreamed of. And the interesting thing about the job I'm in now is I decided last year, halfway through the pandemic, which I think maybe everyone decided something halfway through the pandemic, I decided that I wanted a different kind of job. The job I had was very demanding. I was working easily 70-hour weeks. Pre-pandemic, I was traveling 40% of the time. And it's not like, the sexy kind of traveling you see on TV when people travel for work. I had what they call a patch. So I went to the same place over and over and over to see the same clients over and over and over. And my patch was Arizona. So it was always hotter than like everyone's hellscape at all times, which is all right. I like the desert. But it just wasn't, and I lived in Portland at the time. And like it was, these morning flights to come back the next afternoon. And I just felt really disconnected from the work. And that's why, I had to be unafraid of saying, I don't think I like what I do anymore. Yeah, it pays well. Yeah, the benefits are good. Yeah, whatever. But I wanted to write more. I wanted to do more producing of a podcast. I have a couple of personal hobby podcasts, but I wanted to do things that I was doing as my hobby, as my work. And I remember in March of 2019, I had a conversation with a recruiter because I was looking for a new job. And I told her, I was like, I want to do a podcast for work. I want to do a magazine. I want to do all these creative things with technology. And she told me, you'll never find a job that's going to pay you as much as you make now to do that kind of work. And I was like, okay, click. I didn't hang up on her. I probably could have, but it was like a Zoom call, so that would have been awkward. It's very hard to be like, click, and then you're like leaving the meeting, and then it's like on the lag. It just gets awkward. So I was like, okay, like feedback noted. But the thing that she said to me that I really held on to, because even when people are tearing you down, there's usually a little piece of advice that you can actually receive and implement immediately. Is she said to me, she's like, if you want to write so much or you want to produce content, why is it not on your LinkedIn? And I said, ma'am, that's it. So as soon as she got off the phone with all her negative energy, I went straight to LinkedIn. I put up a new picture that made me feel like I look like a writer. I went ahead and I changed my LinkedIn, and I actually modified my resume so that if anyone reached out to me, I would have an updated resume that had an emphasis on my writing. And I didn't have any of my personal projects on LinkedIn because I thought, well, LinkedIn is for business. Who wants to hear my dating podcast? Or LinkedIn is for business. Who wants to like read my blogs on social issues? Like who actually wants that? And once I realized that, you know what? Someone does want that. And I have to put it out there for them to come and get it. right? And so what was really great about that advice she gave me, even though she said she used my favorite word, never, and then she used my other word, which is like forced poverty. I was like, you're not gonna just take my salary away. And so what was really cool about it is once I did that, this job popped out of nowhere like 3 months later. And they specifically said, we're interested in you for this role because of your podcasting, your blogging, and your website. And I was like, what? And so that person, even though her goal was to kind of make me feel small enough to apply for the job she wanted me to apply for, because she was just a third party recruiter for tech companies, is she gave me a gift. And that gift was an understanding of recruiting that I did not have. I never thought anyone would hire me for what I do on the weekends and after work. And here I am making more money. So to her, doing what I actually really love doing in a space I've been in personally for a long time, which is storytelling, technical storytelling. I've been doing this kind of work for my customers forever. I've been writing content just for them. I've been training them on the content. I've been creative in the way in which I've addressed technical problems and I've centered people first. And now I get to actually do that for my everyday life. And so I just use that example to say, had I gotten, and don't get it wrong, she hurt my feelings. Like, let's not even act like I wasn't salty, as the young people say. Do y'all still say that? Y'all still say salty?
Yeah.
I was, yeah, y'all look like that's not what we say anymore, but us old people out here saying salty. So I was still salty. And I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to give myself like 2 hours to be mad at her. And then I'm going to accept and embrace that she's just doing her job the best she knows how. And sometimes that means telling people stuff like that because she wants to, because she was like, I like you, Grace. Let me give you some real talk. I was like, okay, ma'am, give me some real talk. I thought it was going to be more positive, but I understand that she thought she was doing me a favor. And what I've really begun to understand as I've experienced more of that kind of energy is some people's approach to helping you is misaligned with maybe how you want to be helped, but you can still receive the assistance. And I actually think that that is fundamentally so important to anyone who says they want to be an innovator, to anyone who says that they want to make an impact. Because sometimes you're going to be building a solution or building your dream or whatever it might be, and it's not going to look like what you thought it was going to be. And it's not going to feel like how you thought it was going to feel, but you've got to be open to the idea that where you get to and what you create is just as important as the process to getting there. And you have to really be a part of that process and find yourself in that. So I always say, I don't get too caught up in the ending. I'm all about the story there. Whatever the end is the end. But I really love a good middle, just like a pie or some brownies. It's all about the gooey center. And so I always want to be so mindful of how I'm walking through the journey. And, I've been fortunate, I think, because I've been able to really receive a lot of gifts in the form of feedback, whether it's been well given or not, that has really helped me grow professionally and personally. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and I will open up the floor for questions.
That was so good. Can you tell us why your story or anyone's story for that sake matters?
Oh, yes. I love this question. I think it's so important to share your story because let me give you maybe a story to answer that story. When I was a little girl, my family, we were like the only immigrant family in the town I grew up in. And there were a couple of other immigrant families, but they were from Belgium or they were from places that maybe were more socially acceptable than West Africa. So it is what it is. But I had a friend and her mom's name, well, her name was Laura and her mom's name was Miss Sarah. And when I was in like second grade, I started hanging out with Laura. I was like, Laura's so cool. I like this person a lot. We were hanging out. I didn't know anything about Laura's parents. It's second grade. I'm like, we're at recess. Like, I'm not going to be asking for your credentials there. Okay. We're on the monkey bars. We're having a good time. And one day, Laura invited me to come like play at the local park with some other people. We're also my friends, like on a weekend. It wasn't a school day. I was so excited. And fast forward, because I don't remember all the parts, I eventually got to meet Laura's mom, Miss Sarah. And my mom got to meet Miss Sarah. What was really, really cool was Miss Sarah had actually been an exchange student in the town I grew up in and had been in this same place since she was 16. And by the time I met her, she was probably like in her early 40s. Yet she had a really thick Chilean accent. And I love accents. Well, for someone, I have an accent, but here in the US, I guess anyone that doesn't maybe sound like they're from Nashville, New York, or California has an accent to some of the rest of us. But what immediately drew me to her was her accent. So I was like, oh, my family has an accent. And so as our families began to communicate with one another, my mom found out about Miss Sarah immigrating when she was 16, coming as an exchange student, and then eventually coming to the US, going to college, all these things. And from that day forward, Miss Sarah and my mom were really, really good friends. One of the very few friends my mom had, like of my own friends that weren't from her working or, church or whatever. And that story might seem like, yeah, whatever. So two moms met and they were talking and they had accents. But for my mom, who had an accent that a lot of people made fun of, that a lot of people acted like they didn't understand what she said, hearing Miss Sarah's story, talking to Miss Sarah and Miss Sarah's voice even being her story, made my mom feel like within the group of mothers who were unaccented, they all had cute Southern accents, that she had finally found a friend. And and I think that when my mom would go to school events and Miss Sarah would be there, or when we would hang out together and she would see Miss Sarah, I think it brought her a sense of comfort, a sense of joy, and a sense of belonging that nobody was able to give or provide for her, especially because Miss Sarah identified as other. She identified as Latina and she had red hair and green eyes. And she was like, I am Latina, I am a brown person. And my mom was like, I'm brown too. And so that was such a source of kinship. And I think that that's what your story is about. You never know where in the universe your story is going to beam out. And you never know who's going to feel the light, the rays of your story and feel seen, feel heard, and feel that kindred connection. And it only happens when you open your mouth and you share that story. And if you don't ever speak it, if you don't ever show it, other people don't have the models and the examples to also share their own. And so, sometimes the bravest thing you can ever do in this life on this planet Earth is just to simply share who you are and what makes you that person.
Wow. Mercedes, I don't mean to interrupt. I do have my own question. It kind of builds on what you're talking about. I can remember myself being a high school student. I don't think I was the most confident. And even still, while I'm in college today, I still find it hard to speak up. Do you have any advice on building our own inner confidence or, listening to ourselves, expressing ourselves?
Yeah. Oh, this is a tough question. This is a tough question on so many levels. Thank you for asking, Tyler. Um, I'm going to share another story if that's okay. It's like story time with Grace. When I was little, I was nonverbal. I didn't talk until I was 7, 6.5, 7. When we moved to the US, I refused to speak in public. My brother went to the school across the street from my school. And I think it was like a busy street. It wasn't like an alleyway, right? And every day at snack time and at lunchtime, my teacher would have to call his teacher across the street at an unaffiliated school to our school. And he would have to come over and I would whisper in his ear what I wanted for snack. And then he would come back over at lunch and I would whisper in his ear what I wanted for, snack time. And so lo and behold, he hated me, but like whatever. And I kept in that pattern. Like I never really spoke. I had one friend whose name was also Sarah. Y'all see this pattern? And she was the one person I would like speak to sometimes when she would come over to play. And when we moved from Texas to Tennessee, I was telling my mom something and she was pretending to listen as, guardians are wont to do. And I was like, I don't think I really have any friends. I was like, but you're my friend, right? And my mother looked me dead in my eye and was like, but that's not how it's supposed to be. I was like, what? Like, what do you mean all parents aren't their kids' friends? Like, what? And she was like, other people have other friends. I was like, on this planet, other people have other friends. Like, what are you even saying? And she was like, what do you want to do with your life? Mind you, I'm like 6.5. I haven't thought like much further than snack time. I'm like, I want to have a snack. I want to read a book. And I was like, well, I think I want to do something that like makes the world better. And my mom was like, well, how do you think that's done? And I was like, with friends. And she was like, and what else? And I was like, maybe you have to talk about it. And so she said, how will you ever change the world if the only person you speak to are the people in your family? And I was like, but I am scared. These are strangers. They make fun of my accent. And she's like, it doesn't matter because you are on a path to your purpose. You are on a path to your dreams. And everyone else cannot help you unless you speak up and add value to theirs. And, I don't think at 6.5, I truly grasped that. But as I got older, it began to manifest in such strange ways. And the biggest way that it manifested for me is when I was in undergrad. And, I learned to be outgoing. I learned to speak up. I don't always speak up. There's some instances where I spend the majority of my time being really quiet because I'm trying to like really hear what someone is saying to me. But I remember once in undergrad, we were having a conversation in my poli-sci class, and I kept pretty quiet in the majority of my classes because I was just like academically struggling. So I was like, I can't be talking and taking notes and listening and trying to like read the book at once. And so I was, in the work trying to see what was being said in class. And somebody made a comment about poor people. And it was like a policy class on poverty. And they were like, basically, the gist of it is lazy, like living off the government, just the same rhetoric a lot of people have been saying for ages. And I realized in that moment, I was the only low income person in that class. And those people in the class didn't have friends from low socioeconomic classes. So I had an option. I could either speak up, add my opinion, my lived experience, my story, or I could just sit there, right? And I decided to raise my hand and I decided to, I think, pop off at the mouth, if I'm quite honest. But I said what I had to say. I delivered the sermon for the day. And I remember that after that class, some other students were like, thank you for like speaking up. You've been quiet like all year. And we just never thought of that perspective. And we're going to go back and we're going to think about why we even thought these things to begin with. And that moment single-handedly kind of like tipped the scale for me. And I realized that it's about the balance. There's some people who are just speaking to fill the void because they're so scared of what silence is saying to them. And there are some people who have to put their voices out into the void in order to speak to someone else. And I think it's when you're scared or you don't know if you have the courage to say the things that need to be said for you, not necessarily for everyone else. I always remember what my mom said. Well, is this the moment that's leading you towards your purpose and your dreams? And if it is, are you willing to invest your voice into that work?
Thank you. Wow.
It looks like we have a couple questions in the chat. So we got a question from Prince. They say, what African country did you say you were from? Because I'm from Uganda, Rwanda.
I'm from Ghana. I was born in Accra, but spent my childhood in Tema. The West Coast.
We have another question from Grant. Have you ever felt scared or unable to share your truth and identify with people you already knew and cared about? For example, your family. And if you have, how did you overcome those hardships?
Yeah, this is a great question. I actually, in 2016, I lost like two of my oldest and bestest, dearest friends of like my entire like early adulthood, college through grad school, through all that stuff. And I lost them because I spoke my piece. So I don't know if you all remember even how old you were in 2016, but it was during the Charlottesville, I guess they call them protests. I call them hate speech, but whatever. When I think it was like the inception of the Proud Boys, whatever was before them was in Charlottesville, and they were spewing a lot of hateful rhetoric. And me and my friends were talking about it, and we all like Black women. We were all actually immigrants from other countries. One was Muslim, and we were having a conversation about like, what do we do about people like that? And I have very strong opinions that were unpopular for them, because my thought about people like that is that you love them. That does not mean you don't correct them. That does not mean you don't prosecute against them. And that doesn't mean eventually, hopefully, you don't jail them. But it does mean that no one has ever been hated to transformation. No one wakes up and says, man, those people hate me so much. Me, today's the day I change for the better because I'm so hated. And I made that comment. I was like, now that doesn't mean that people who look like us need to do that work, but someone has to step into that chasm and they have to fill it with light and love. Once again, love is not meek. Love is corrective. There is justice in the world, but we can't fix it through the same sort of emotions that their hate comes from. And they did not receive that message. They felt like that kind of rhetoric was dangerous. They said that made me just as bad as those kinds of people. All of this hateful stuff towards me about my reaction. And, you know, I had went a period without talking too much about those issues with them because I knew that they would not receive it well, because their orientation in the world was not that of natural optimism. And, you know, one of them even said, well, all of our time as friends, you've always been the one who's been an activist. You've always signed petitions. You've done sit-ins. You've done this, you've done that. And I said, but that has always come from a place of absolute love and always come from a place of absolute morality and not judgment. Punishment makes no one feel good. It does not change you or transform the soul. And Angela Davis even talks about that in Our Prisons Obsolete, how she herself does not believe in a punitive based punishment system. So, you know, for folks who are interested in like more of the theory around that. And the consequence of me speaking up was that I lost the two people I honestly loved the most in the world. They were sisters to me. And it was hard. And the thing that they said that made it so surprising is they were like, why are you like this? Who are you? And I was like, I have always been this person. This is the person who you love. If I was not this way, you would not even like me. So why would you think that that orientation was only a gift for you and not something for the world? It is so easy to, I think, that shrouds around yourself for the people who love you most, because sometimes they love who they thought you were. They never took the time to know who you are and are evolving to be. But here's the thing about freedom. Like, so this tattoo on my wrist is an adinkra. It comes from an ancient pictographic writing system from the Confederation of Tribes that I belong to. And it symbolizes, it's called Fawade, and it means go and take what is yours. But it is the symbol of freedom and emancipation. And all of the symbols have like little stories. And the story of this one is that freedom is for everyone. And once you are free, it is your responsibility to ensure that everyone else is free, no matter the cost. That is why you must go and take what is yours. And so I think that, over time, what I've begun to understand about those relationships is, even if it's your family, even if it's your favorite baby cousin, even if it's your granny, like sometimes the relationships that we have with people are in our lives are for us to use as a part of our evolution. And we can sometimes grow away from them and grow out of those relationships. But the beauty of what was there is still there. Like when I think back on these two people, I'm not like, well, I hope they fall off a cliff at Yosemite. I hope they're well. I hope that they have found inside of their pain a way to crack the shell and receive the light. If they haven't, I hope that they do at some point, because living with that inside of you is a heavy burden. Finding it easier to hate than to love actually takes a toll on every element of your essence, down to your molecules. And so I hope that when I think of them, I can send them light, give them love. But what I will never have in my life again are people who limit my ability to give more of myself to the world. It's easy to love those who are lovable. It is so much harder to love those who are monsters, but that work must still be done. And so, you know, anyone who doesn't align with that principle, that's okay, but they can't be in my inner circle, because I need to feed off of more of that in order to maintain what I've got to do on my journey. And so, I get sad about it. Like I do. The other day I found a card that one of them had written. I promptly ripped it up and threw it in the trash because I don't like to dwell. But I read it first, and I remembered what about that friendship even helped me evolve to this point. So they still gave me a gift. They still showed me something about myself that I never thought that I would have. And that's like the courage to stand up to the people I love the most. And so, I think feel secure in knowing your truth. And people won't always like that. And you know what? That's okay. Doesn't make it feel good. It doesn't make it easier, but just being free at all costs should always be your primary, goal in this life.
Wow,
Um,
absolutely. Do you have time for a couple more
I
questions?
do, I do.
Excellent. Okay, so it looks like we've got a question in the chat from Jason. He says, how did you learn to become such a good collaborator?
Ooh, how did I learn to become such a good collaborator?
And then we got one after this.
Let's see. That's a good question. I think for me, I would define myself as, I love to work by myself. I'm one of those people who you're like, what's your favorite working style? It's like sitting in a room with a book, reading the book, writing notes, highlighting, being in the margins, and then like joining a group of people to talk about it. But what I found makes a good collaborator is the ability to connect the dots. So what I said earlier about I am a systems person is I soon realized that I could start to connect a lot of what felt like disjointed ideas really, really quickly. And so my secret to being a good collaborator is being able to actually bring in a bunch of different ideas that might feel like they're in opposition to one another, but have themes and threads. So I can almost always identify them and say, well, these are the themes and threads. How do we actually build something now that has all of this as a part of its DNA? And so that's how I've become a good collaborator. And I've also learned the art of like not being married to my idea in its inception. Like if I'm working on a project that is collaborative, very rarely do I show up and say it has to end up like this. I always like to show up and say, here's an idea. Like, how could it be transformed? What do you think of the idea? How would you change it? And being open to the end result being nothing like the idea I walked into the room with. And that actually takes practice. You can only get good at collaborating by doing three things. One, don't take any kind of critique or feedback personally, unless they're like, what you did is terrible and I hate you, then maybe you want to step aside and like discuss it with them. Two, don't be afraid of throwing out parts and pieces of what you brought to the table and only keeping snippets of it in order to have something that fits better into the collective. And three, being enthusiastic about supporting other people's ideas and really being able to let the ego go, but let confidence show up. And confidence always makes room for others. And so I think that those are, three tactics for becoming a better collaborator um, quite effectively and quite quickly if you can practice and iterate on that often.
Thank you for that. It looks like Mahala Mwaka says, my mom is from Zambia and immigrated to the US on her own when she was 19. She said she struggled with adjusting to a different school system and new people. What was something that helped you adjust?
That's a great question. I used to write a lot. I mean, I still write a lot, but when I was a kid, I used to write a lot, and um, I would spend a lot of time outside. Like for me, the place that I always feel at home is in the trees and the bushes. And on a limb of a tree, I always went outside and took a journal or, took crayons and some coloring paper. And I always tried to put everything out there, even if it wasn't for anybody but me. And I find that sometimes when you create, maybe you dance, maybe you sing, maybe you just sit still. I think that making space to just feel the things helps you actually adjust instead of trying to bury them away, excavating them until you feel settled. And so I still do that all the time now. If I ever need to um, have an attitude adjustment, I like to do the things that it takes until I feel settled. Um, okay.
Yeah, I think our last question's from Jerry and is in the chat there if you want to read it.
On our path through life, it can be really hard to do things when you don't feel that you are being liked. I'm thinking of the classic high school feeling. Can you give us some advice around persevering when the world around you doesn't seem to be supporting your work? Ooh, all right, Jerry. That is so great. Um, and that will be true. I mean, that will be true until maybe like the end of days. Um, yeah. Here's my thoughts on being liked. Some people are just not likable. I'm gonna just go out and say it loudly. And I, as a person, I don't worry about one, people liking me, two, and I don't worry about liking people. I will be on teams or like hiring committees where they'll be like, well, I didn't like Grace. And I'll be like, and can Grace do the job? Is Grace going to be great with clients? Is Grace got the skill set? Like, who cares if you don't like her? Maybe Grace was nervous. Maybe Grace takes a lot of warming up, like whatever it may be. So I just want to say that like out of the gate, that we are so much in the cult of personality and the cult of likability. We are so involved in being liked, in wanting to like, that we sometimes forget that our purpose on this planet is not to be likable or to be liked. Your purpose here is to be kind. And sometimes that means people are not going to like you. So that's been really hard for me. I am a West African daughter. I was raised to be like the perfect helper, like to show up even when not asked, to go above and beyond, to be excessively and excessively accessible. And, you know, as an adult, I've had to unlearn some of those traits around that, because what that's meant for me on my journey is whenever I've done something that was not liked, I've always defaulted to something that would be more likable and well received. And I'm gonna speak on my experience. What that's meant for me is that my dreams have been delayed. What that's meant for me is the stuff that I wanted to do 15, 20 years ago, I'm just now doing now, because I was so busy about my family approving of what I was doing, mostly my family, because, at like 17, 18, I mean, my friends, yeah, sure, but what were we even talking about then? That I put a lot of my personal goals on second shift, and I put a lot of my family's goals on first. And sometimes you have to do that for a number of reasons, right? We've all got obligations, and we've all got obligations to specific people. But what I realized is that that was me manifesting that feeling of being liked. And, in high school, I was popular, but I didn't think too much of my popularity. And what I mean by that is being liked made me stressed out. It made me feel like I had to put so much energy into how into supporting people's thoughts and feelings about me that do not matter. I'm sorry, the dog is barking. She's really feeling this part. She too does not care about being liked, but that's because she's 16. And I found that whenever I was doing the work of being likable, I was not doing the work of being me. And what's so interesting is, unless like you're really just a piece of trash, and there are some people out here who need a whole, exorcism inside themselves. But I think that everyone has something inside of them that connects to someone outside of them. And I think that people light up in a specific way when they are doing the thing that they need to be doing, whatever it is. And what I have found is the more I have started to do those things, the more I have not worried about it being liked, and the better it's been received. I'll be like, I don't care, I'm gonna do this. And people are like, that was fantastic. I'm like, what? Really? Because I showed up to do something that I felt compelled to do for me. And I mean, sometimes that has meant losing friends. Sometimes that has meant being lonely. So I don't want to give you this like Hallmark card of it'll be great. It won't be. There will be times when the only thing keeping you going is the belief that what you are doing matters. And you know what? My motto in life these days is this: there's only one person who needs to believe in you for you to achieve anything you need to achieve. And that person looks at you in the mirror every day. A lot of people want external motivation and they want external validation, but all of that stuff only comes from inside. And so I now don't worry about people supporting my work. I don't even think about it that much. Not even my family supports a lot of the things I do. I do it anyway. And I say, you know what? No offense, no disrespect, but this is not your life. And at the end of mine, I have to account to me. And so whenever I'm feeling pressured to be more likable, whenever I'm feeling pressured to show up a certain way, I say, what is this feeling actually about? Am I scared to be me, or am I scared of the reaction? I'll get for being me. And if it's the reaction I'm afraid of, I'll forge straight ahead. Because, I think a lot of times that's the thing about perseverance. People think that if you persevere, you don't fear or you don't get nervous or you don't get sad. Perseverance is about everyday courage. It's about waking up and doing what you must do again and again and again, despite everything else. So that's literally the definition of persevering. It's its own form of habitual practice. So just keep trying and don't be discouraged if you're not consistent yourself. I want to put that out there. A lot of times we are hardest on we. And I really want to encourage everyone to not be so hard on themselves as they try to build to something. You've got to give yourself space too. And every day is not going to be like a slam dunk rock star day. Some days, it's going to be, I don't know, beneath the mantle of the earth's crust. Like you're not going to feel high, you're going to feel low. And that's okay. That's all a part of the process and the journey. I see that Kira, is that right? Did I pronounce your name correctly?
I'll just keep it real short. I just wanted to say thank you because, well, no, let me back that up. Let me say thank you for sharing your light and your words. I know personally, almost every single thing you said resonated with me in some way or another. And I think that the words you have to say are beautiful and powerful, and your voice and the things that you are going to project, I have probably already changed the world and will only continue to do so. So thank you for sharing so much.
Wow, absolutely. I can only echo that. I know that we're running past your time limit, so I just wanted to give you this space and say thank you so much for giving us so much to chew on. And we really appreciate you coming for the third year in a row.
It's my pleasure. It's such an honor to share my story. So thank you for making this space in your hearts and, in your schedule to receive me.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of love in the chat, so please take a look at that before you leave.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. We're so grateful to you. Thank you for visiting with us and sharing all your golden wisdom. It's always amazing.